I'm Alex Terzich with HGA Architects and Engineers. We are a full-service architecture firm that's based in the Twin Cities, so I'm in Minneapolis. We have a number of offices around the country as well, but that's where we're headquartered. So with this project, it was primarily myself and Nat Madsen. He's also in the Minneapolis office, developing the design, working with Studio NYL, Will Babington. Nat and Will couldn't make it, but we had great support from Ali Ditzel and Sam Daly from HGA, and then also Philippe Francisco from NYL to help with the fabrication and installation. And this is our first time, HGA's first time doing this. I know NYL has done this before with other firms, but big thanks to Boston Valley for this pretty incredible opportunity. So we came at this, we kicked around a bunch of different ideas, but for us, this really came out of a very specific project and revisiting a moment in that project. So 2 buildings at Bowdoin College in Maine, Brunswick, Maine. The one in the foreground, Center for Arctic Studies, and then in the background, Mills Hall, the classroom building. Mills Hall was a piece of cake that was all clad in a water-struck brick made by Morin. They're actually in Maine, it's the campus standard. It was very streamlined to do that. With the Center for Arctic Studies, there was an interest in developing a more kind of specialized masonry cladding. And so we started, it was originally conceived as slate planks that were quarried in Virginia. So polished face, very crisp, but still in a kind of masonry approach. Nat got value engineered, just, projects are always struggling with budget. And so we really, at that point, we switched to looking at long format bricks. And so we started with a brick from Denmark called the Columba by Peterson. That's a beautiful brick, but then people started having cold feet about international sourcing at that particular time. And it changed to a domestic brick, the Roman Maximus by Glengarry. We just weren't happy with the look, and then we eventually landed on this long format black brick from Pacific Clay. So we wanted to revisit that, and this is kind of the essence of the project. So that shift from stone to clay as a cladding material was challenging in part because we lost control over the format of the masonry unit. With stone, we could decide the height, the length, and the depth, but with brick, we were constrained by the available brick sizes. In other words, a plank became a brick, and in that trade-off, an important part of the design idea was lost. So what we wanted to do for this workshop was to revisit that moment and explore a custom extruded terracotta plank that would preserve the expression of the original cladding concept for the Center for Arctic Studies. And this is just a little sketch that went along with our brief. A really simple idea, which is to leverage the simplicity and kind of low tech of masonry systems, but to marry that with the opportunities of a custom extruded terracotta plank. So to kind of put this in some context, I'll use this as an example. This is a project from our office, Lakewood Mausoleum. Really kind of formally compelling, crisp building that's all clad in granite planks. So we had control over the coursing, over the surface texture, and in doing so, you get this really bespoke cladding system that's rooted in a really simple material and really simple technology. Another example would be looking at Thomas Pfeiffer's Glenstone Museum, which I actually just got to visit a couple weeks ago and was totally floored by. And super simple idea of just taking large format, custom precast concrete planks. Those are 1 foot by 1 foot by 6 feet, and using that to clad the building. So this idea of simple stacking rather than panelized cladding. So because a lot of this was really rooted in cost, that was where we started. So we were really trying to find a sort of sweet spot for a cladding material that was cheaper than stone, probably more expensive than even the most expensive brick, but kind of found that nice middle ground. So down here you can see, just for some comparison, ACAW modular brick, about $7 a square foot. more in water-struck brick, about $12 a square foot. The long format Peterson Colombo gets up to about 24. And then if you were doing stone, you might be anywhere from 25 to 75. So we were kind of looking for something in this range. So we started off working with Boston Valley, ran through a number of different scenarios in terms of the coursing and the unit height. And what we were finding, at least in these initial accounts, was that it was quite a bit more expensive than we had hoped. So the Roman was, kind of in the 70 to 115 range. The modular was 55 to 90. The utility, 68 to 102. And then the jumbo was about 54 to 75. So, we were a little discouraged at first, and I think a lot of that had to do with, I think, the way that the plant is set up. It's primarily optimized for panels. And so there were some conversations that we had with John Krause and others about ways that we could bring this down, and I'll kind of come back to that in a little bit. But it did kind of, at that point, we weren't confident in making this purely about a kind of economic argument. So, we sort of shifted gears a little bit and started to really just have fun with the opportunities of the extrusions, looking at the profile, the surface texture, and so forth. And then from that, this idea kind of got sparked about maybe doing a kind of broken edge, and really starting to introduce this kind of somewhat more sort of less controlled texture into the unit itself. So we started to develop a profile that was all about breaking, and it was kind of this idea of sort of paired units that would actually be split. I think the term Kit Kat bar got thrown out by Andy at one point, and we sort of like that, started to do some explorations of what that broken edge might look like. Developed a profile, this one that you see kind of on the top right is about where we landed, so really like a mirrored, so single extrusion that then gets split down the middle and makes two independent units. In terms of how we were going to split it, there was a lot of conversation about that. You can see some studies here about maybe running a kind of like drill through it to sort of perforate it and then snap it, whether it was going to be scored, whether it was going to be broken when it was sort of before it was fired, after it was fired, where in the sort of drying process that was going to happen. Early studies looked at scoring the material, which led to like a very controlled break that we were less excited about. The drilling, it kind of had this irregularity to it that maybe was a little bit too much. There were a number of experiments where Andy landed was a kind of moment in the drying process where it was pretty brittle, hadn't been fired yet, and allowed it to really snap rather than tear. So then, as we were developing this, the thinking was about doing a kind of monochromatic expression. The Center for Arctic Studies was all black. That's where some of our initial thinking was, so kind of a black on black approach, with a primary face and a secondary face. So that primary face is the one that's very sculpted. It's got the glaze, and then the secondary face is very flat and probably unglazed. So this is kind of some of those initial thoughts. And then we also wanted to investigate the kind of argument about how this could be done very sustainably, or more sustainably than a typical brick or stone system. And so we looked into embodied carbon, comparing different systems. So a conventional modular brick system, the slate planks that we were kind of referring back to on Center for Arctic Studies, a conventional terracotta ring screen on aluminum rails, and then this stacked terracotta plank system. And what we were seeing was that the CO2, so the embodied carbon of each of these gets lower and lower as you go along. There's a little bit of, there's sort of some asterisks to this because these two include a concrete brick shelf, which actually adds to that total. And is based on a kind of detailing where the system that we're doing is really floating. It's anchored back to a shelf angle, whereas a more conventional brick or stone system would actually sit on a concrete ledge. But nonetheless, what we do know about this is that as we were developing the extrusion that compared to a conventional brick, you're using considerably less material because you've got this kind of hollow shell rather than a more solid, even a cord brick still has quite a bit more mass. And so you're being quite a bit more efficient with the material that's lighter, the embodied carbon would be less. As we were starting to think about glazes, there's a number of different opportunities about do you glaze the broken edge, do you not, do you glaze on just one of the curved faces, both of them, different glazes, one on each. We could flip this around and do the flat vertical face. There are instances where we glaze the top surface. So really kind of thinking through all of those opportunities. The mock-up started to take shape really as a way of thinking about how do you introduce a punched window into this? How do you kind of test different expressions? So we wanted to see the kind of the primary sort of sculpted face. We wanted to see what it looks like when it's flat, what it looks like when it's unglazed, two different corners. So here we have this kind of cork miter corner. Here we go from the kind of sculpted to the flat. The cork miter was an interesting one because it kind of requires two cuts, and you want to make sure that you conceal the openings in the extrusion. And then that kind of problem of like, what do you do with those ends? Do you leave them exposed and fill them with mortar? Do you do capped ends? And so we looked at a couple different ways to do it. So we have basically like a capped or solid end here, and then over here we tested putting mortar into the extrusions. This side went a little bit haywire because the flat face got glazed when we really wanted it to be unglazed, and so we did this kind of goofy thing where we just like trimmed off the extrusion. So that one didn't kind of turn out the way that it was intended, but nonetheless, it was a great opportunity just to kind of try out a number of different scenarios. And the plank length, a lot of this is really about getting beyond the 7 5/8 or 11 5/8 kind of brick size and getting up to like 2'10" or thereabouts with some of these lengths. Glazing, we had settled on a brown, like a mocha through body clay, and so kind of keeping with that idea of sort of a monochromatic approach, looked at a number of different examples of what we could do. Andy put together some really beautiful options for that. These actually came about like a week before this was all supposed to happen. So, but the great thing was that all of the options were great, and I think that any of them could be really successful. We had landed on this kind of brown on brown approach to kind of keep going with the idea of a sort of monochromatic expression that was about kind of matte versus gloss. When the pieces showed up, it turned out that the glaze didn't turn out as expected, so there's some brown in it, but it actually took on this kind of light sort of greenish tone. But I think the beauty of glazing is that it's very hard to do something that's not just kind of wonderful no matter what you do. So this, we were really happy with it. Nonetheless, the expression is really kind of beautiful, and we get this kind of interesting gradient. And because of the way that these are glazed, they're actually sat up so that the nose is pointing up, and that allows the glaze to kind of run down and you get a kind of different color as it goes down the curve. Andy helping us with some of the pre-cuts, a shot just of the mitered corner, a way to kind of pull the cork miter out to the edge so that we're concealing the hole in the extrusion. I think we probably made the fabrication of this a little bit harder than we needed to because of the fact that all the pieces were pre-cut to exact size. I think the way that we really do this would be to pick a standard length, whether it's 2'10" or what have you, do random starters that establish a random bond, and then from there you just go with the exact same units. But because we're working in such a small area, we kind of had to pre-cut everything just to kind of introduce some randomness that probably made it harder than it needed to be. So we had the glorious advantage of working with masons on this. They had asked us, so you guys are gonna lay all this up, right? And it's like, we're happy to help, but none of us are masons. And I think the skillfulness of a mason is not to be underestimated. And so we had this great crew. So we had Dennis, Andy, and Dave. And it was interesting because, Andy was a little kind of suspect about the whole thing at first, and he kind of lectured us a little bit about kind of productivity and simplicity and 7 and 5/8 units, and but by the end everybody seemed to be having a good time. Everybody was really happy with it. I think they were really proud of their work, and I do think it's our kind of goal, or it's our kind of our mandate as architects to be respectful of the trades, but also to kind of push them a little bit outside of their comfort zone as a way of getting to kind of better results. And so this is some shots that we took outside. It really kind of has this kind of great effect once you bring it out into the daylight. And yeah, I mean, all in all, it's it's been a really kind of exciting opportunity for us to see where this went. And kind of close on this image because there's really sort of two key parts to this. One is just the idea of a plank, of a terracotta plank, and then the other is about the sort of sculpted face and the broken edge. And I think that for us, would we ever really do this on a project with the sculpted face and the broken edge? I don't know. It's bold. It's maybe more bold than we would go for most of the kind of work that we do. But I do think that the plank idea as an option that really doesn't exist out there is something that we would definitely do for sure. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to cost. And just having a good conversation with John about how to do this. And it sounds like this is something now that they've had a chance to sleep on it that could get kind of to the target that we're after. And so something that we feel is really sort of teed up for a future project.